John 2, verse 23. Now, while he was in Jerusalem at the Passover festival, many people saw the signs he was performing and believed in his name. But Jesus would not entrust himself to them, for he knew all people. He did not need any testimony about mankind, for he knew what was in each person. I received a message this morning asking me if I had thought about gathering with the people who live in Southern California who are nearby to me. Maybe going to a restaurant or doing what I see as some sort of a hangout. And the person who sent me the message has good intentions. I know that. But as I was sitting down with the Lord, I was not feeling like this was something that was coming from God. It felt like the person's own idea, not a spirit-led suggestion. And I started to wonder why the suggestion was being made. Like, what would this look like to that person? And what was God's intention on bringing this up? I did not feel like it was a suggestion coming from God, but I know that God brings everything up, and he does it for his purpose. And some of the things that I was thinking and feeling were, first of all, I don't really need anything more added to my plate, and that feels like something that's added to my plate that isn't coming from him. Do people think that I need human suggestions, that it's not enough for me to be led day to day by God in the role that he's given me? Because it's a pretty big role, and it's got a lot of day in and day out crushing, day in and day out time that I'm spending alone with the Lord to be built to share a message with you. Not only do I not need something added to my plate that isn't from him, but I also don't live the same life. I'm not trying to covet something for myself here like I did for many years when I was of the world in hangouts and idle chatter. I'm here for a very specific role, and nothing about this role has anything to do with me and what I want. I'm not here to hang out, and I don't see that in anybody's testimony or any documented story regarding God's servants. What I see is Jesus did not entrust himself to anybody. He didn't place himself in the care of anybody. He didn't have a clique. His disciples were not a clique. Him leading and teaching his disciples was not something that he was doing for himself or to satisfy some longing for self. It was to raise them so that he as a kernel of wheat would grow into more wheat, and that wheat would produce more kernels of wheat, and those kernels of wheat would produce more kernels of wheat. We're not here for ourselves. We've died to that. I'm not here for some individual clique. And how would that make the rest of the body feel? Maybe like there's favoritism, like I invest in this part of the body more because they're local. These things don't make sense. God has moved me in a very specific role, and anything that he's building in me today is for the entire body that chooses it, not just for those who are local. And I would ask God this question about why he had me buy that building, and doesn't it make things exempt to other people in different areas? If that physical building is needed in order for people to get help, isn't that a problem? These were questions that I asked the Lord. He's not limited by whether we live in Southern California, by whether there's a building that we're going to meet at. We meet online in the spirit. That's enough. In fact, to me, it's even better because we're not bound by location and we're not bound by anything in the physical. We're also not hindered by it. No one's distracted by what people look like. All we're doing is listening for the heart and the spirit. And that's where we need to be. Not caught up in worldly things or the way that the world does things. I'm not going to feel closer to people or feel more in the spirit because I'm meeting with someone physically. In fact, meeting with someone physically can have hindrances as well. I need to sort of fill in space rather than having these pauses that we have when we meet in the spirit and when we're speaking from the heart by the spirit. Jesus wasn't hanging out. He had a purpose in every gathering, everything that he did. There was always a purpose. And the message was not prohibited to those who wanted to hear. And yet he didn't go form individual relationships with people. And in the word, we see that everything is to be done for the building up of the church, the building up of the body, which is not exclusive to Southern California or where I live or BFFs or, well, I have a history with this person. No, none of that matters. Another thing I want to tell you is that when you start getting BFF-y with people, it starts to hinder your ability to speak truth. You end up in idolatrous relationships and you're not able to speak directly and truthfully about what God has you speaking. We have to step back, even from our children, even from our parents, our spouses, in order to get first with God. First with God. And then you're going to see your relationships differently. You're going to see your relationships as only being because God has placed you in a role in that relationship. And I don't see how I could do that if I'm hanging out. Jesus went and had dinner with the tax collectors, but it doesn't say that Jesus continued to do that. He had dinner to share a parable with them, to speak to them, to call them up on what they were doing and how they were living, to share a hope with them. There are times where God will put you in individual situations to do that. Yesterday, I was doing that all day, and I was at a car dealership, giving opportunities for people to hear what I was saying in conversation. These people still chose to do the wrong thing. But one of the things that God has been showing me is that he will have me take the brunt. And he's been showing me this repeatedly. He has me take the brunt in order for another person to have an opportunity to hear the word and to see how I behave, in order to shine that light. And I have to be used in that way. So he may have me doing that in individual situations, but he's the one who leads me to what I'm going to do. It's not like I have on the 5th of every month or the 5th Sunday of every month, I'm going to meet at a restaurant with people and first of all, place myself in a situation where we're in a public place. We can't pray. We can't listen to hymns. We can't do the things that God's people do. We're going to be prohibited from being able to assemble in the way he wants us to assemble to begin with. And second of all, the energy and internal resources that I have are to be used where he calls me to use them. The disciples were going from town to town. They would come in from one trip, they would pray, they would gather together, and then God would say, I've set apart so-and-so to go here. They didn't even know where their next trip was, just like I don't know where my next trip is. And I'm not going to fill my calendar when I don't even know what he wants me doing from day to day. I don't know where he wants me to spend that energy and those resources. When you guys are giving suggestions to people, make sure it's a suggestion that's spirit-led and not something from your own ideas. If I was not solid in what I know that I'm doing from the Lord, if I didn't sit down with the feelings that I had after receiving that message, that suggestion might have swayed me. It might have made me think, maybe I'm doing something wrong. Maybe I do need to do this thing. It's inappropriate for us to insert our own idolatrous ideas into somebody else's life experience. It's God's job to tell us where to go. And it's our job to listen for what God is telling us. If he has a word that he wants you to go share with someone, then by all means share that word. But if you're coming up with your own ideas for somebody else's life, you better check that with him, because you may be presenting a stumbling block. You need to be in step if you're going to be used by him. Everything I have on a daily basis belongs to God. There is nothing that belongs to me. And that's the place you have to get to if you're going to serve him. Everything you have has to belong to him. Everything I feel has to be brought back to him. If I feel lonely, I don't get to go compulsively try to do things in the world to fulfill a longing that can only be met by God. And in fact, any loneliness that I've ever felt in this ministry has more to do with the fact that no one understands what I'm doing. No one's doing this yet. Though some of you are starting to be built to do this, I've been doing this for a long time with no one else to trudge with because no one else understands. That's the only loneliness that I've really felt. And going and meeting with people isn't going to help that. I have to bring that back to God because he's the only one who understands what he's doing in me. I have to bring it back to Jesus, who suffered and was tempted in every way and now is able to help us because of that. I have to understand that that loneliness and that isolation and that alienation is exactly what my Savior suffered. And I have to understand that in order for me to know what I've been given, I'm going to have to suffer. In similar ways, I'm going to have to suffer. To be very honest, having a lunch with people is not going to satisfy some sort of need to be understood. It's going to pull from resources within myself that God has set apart to be used for the entire body. Because I'm never going to have a lunch or a meeting with anybody who understands what I'm doing right now. So it's really just going to be about me being there for those people. And if God hasn't told me to be there for those people in that setting, I run the risk of stepping in a place where God is supposed to be, not me. I offer myself 3 days a week, at least 3 days a week, in person to answer questions, to do a Bible study, to do a workshop, and to do a Sabbath assembly. Sometimes more than that. And on a daily basis in email, text, phone calls, videos. I don't think people realize how much this actually pulls from me on a daily basis. And yet I would go and meet with people if that's what God told me to do, but it's not what he tells me to do. And I don't need anyone else to tell me what they think I should be doing. I'm doing this video because I want you to think about the suggestions that you give to other people, and I want you to think about it before you give those suggestions. I'm also doing this video because I want you to understand that your self-contrived ministries, your personal ideas of what you think you should be doing, have no place in the ministry of God. You need to receive it from him. I'm doing this video because I want you to understand that when you die of yourself, it's him living through you. He has every ability to move you and tell you where you need to go and what you need to do, and to move through you as you are in obedience to him. I'm doing this video because those of you who are receiving advice from other people, you need to bring that to God and make sure that that is advice that is coming from him. Frankly, if you have a relationship with God, he doesn't need to go through somebody else to tell you anything. And I have a relationship with God. I know what he's telling me on a daily basis. Discern your shepherds. Make sure that the people who you are listening to, who are giving you suggestion, or who are shepherding you, they're still human. You need to make sure that the suggestion that they are giving you is truly from God. And if you discover that you are the one giving suggestion that is not coming from God, you need to close your mouth for a while and figure out what's going on that you're doing that. What's going on that you're separating from the vine and trying to be a branch all by yourself. It doesn't matter if your advice sounds Christian or however you have it justified in your head. If it is not coming from God, if God did not tell you to say that, you need to go return to him and find out why you're doing that. Please discern what I'm saying with him.